Sexual misconduct allegations once again rocking the entertainment world. This time, multiple women have alleged Coraline and the Sandman author Neil Gaiman sexually assaulted them.
First of all, Tortoise Media ran a podcast series over the summer detailing accusations from 5 women, some of whom who used pseudonyms or first names only. Now, New York Magazine has run a major story headlined "There is no safe word," where 8 women detail their alleged encounters with Gaiman. 4 of those women had featured on the Tortoise Media podcast.
Gaiman responded to the allegations on Tuesday, writing in part, "As I read through this latest collection of accounts, there are moments I half recognize and moments I don't. Description of things that happened sitting beside things that emphatically did not happen. I'm far from a perfect person, but I've never engaged in non-consensual sexual activity with anyone ever." Reporter Lila Shapiro says she went through texts, emails, diary entries, and police conversations for her story. One woman named Scarlett Pavlovich told New York Magazine that after she met Gaiman and his then-wife, singer Amanda Palmer, Palmer asked her to babysit their child.
Pavlovich alleges numerous incidents, such as Gaiman ordering her to lick her own feces, having sex with her while Gaiman's son was in the room, and telling her to call him master.
Another woman, Caroline Wallner, said she fell asleep reading a story to Gaiman's son, and she alleges that Gaiman then got into that bed, laid in between them, and grabbed her hand and placed it on his genitals.
Caroline says Gaiman's business manager offered her $5,000 to sign an NDA, but she refused and ramped up the price to $300,000. According to New York Magazine, Gaiman obliged.
Another woman named Kendra Stout accused Gaiman of rape, and Catherine Kendall says that in 2012, Gaiman tried to sexually assault her in his tour bus when she was 22. New York Magazine reports that years later, Gaiman paid her $60,000 for therapy to, quote, make up some of that damage.
Gaiman, through his representatives, has denied the allegations and said these encounters were consensual. He previously told the Tortoise podcast over the summer that, quote, sexual degradation, bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism may not be to everyone's taste, but between consenting adults, BDSM is lawful. Some have taken to X to air their thoughts on the matter.
Legendary author J.K. Rowling wrote, "The literary crowd that had a hell of a lot to say about Harvey Weinstein before he was convicted has been strangely muted in its response to multiple accusations against Neil Gaiman from young women who'd never met yet, as with Weinstein, tell remarkably similar stories."
NBC News and tech culture reporter Kat Tenbarge said on Blue Sky, "Neil Gaiman shouldn't be treated like an extreme outlier. It's not fame or following that enables men like Gaiman to act the way they do. It's power, and power can be A-list celebrity status, or it can be the head of any ordinary household or a leader in any local community."
Apparently, texts that New York Magazine reviewed showed that Pavlovich at one point said her interactions with Gaiman were consensual. Mystery novel author Daniel Friedman pointed this out, writing in part on X, "I don't know how anyone can ever defend himself against a rape allegation if a time-stamped contemporaneous text message from the accuser saying it was consensual and wonderful is not exculpatory evidence. Neil Gaiman is a womanizer who used his fame to get young women to sleep with him, but it's hard to believe the wild Marquis de Sade allegations against him when his texts with the accuser look like this." So, very sordid tale that I read last night and this morning. So Neil Gaiman is a really, his work is very beloved. I'm not overly familiar with it, but so much of his work have been made into TV and movies. The Sandman, Coraline was a movie. The Sandman's a series that is getting another season. He's very wealthy. He's been very successful having his works adapted. So one interesting part of this will be if people react to this in a Harvey Weinstein Me Tooing sort of environment, that like he's canceled and we're not allowed to appreciate or adapt his work anymore. It will have major entertainment economic consequences. I don't know if we're still doing that. We kind of were at the fever pitch of Me Too. We're like, okay, you can't enjoy this person's stuff anymore. You can't separate. You know, I used to remember having this debate with a lot of people in liberal circles. Of like, well, can we separate the art from the artist? Can we still appreciate? When is that line? So many things we've liked, you know, even historically in the art world were done by, I'm sure, people who had moral problems. So it does get interesting. As for the accusations themselves, I would say that, you know, while I tend to be at least somewhat skeptical or say, how am I supposed to know, especially when accusations are leveled by people who are fully anonymous, I tend to go, well, I don't know. In this case, they're not fully anonymous. There are several of the women, did come forward, although I take that last person's point that in one case, they did at least write a text saying it was consensual.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to get in too much into the intricacies of this particular case. People who wish to do so can read the New York Magazine story, which is very lengthy, and read Neil Gaiman's response to that, in which he denies any suggestion of coercive behaviour, says he was basically imperfect but did not abuse anyone. I take your point about the cancellation of people. I do think it's, There are always two things, to my mind, to be balanced in these situations. One is the fact that for decades, perhaps centuries, there was widespread abuse of women and the perpetrators suffered very few consequences for it. And so the arising of the Me Too movement was intended, I think, partly as a corrective to that, and I think that there were terrible people like Harvey Weinstein who got their comeuppance for it. Against that, you have the danger of that pendulum swinging too far and allegations that are not sustained or are just false wrecking people's lives. Now, I do think it's very difficult when you get into this situation of consent being retrospectively withdrawn. I just think that's I don't know how any justice or fairness can really work according to those lines.
Oh, 100%.
And that's not to say, that is not to belittle the trauma of people who suffer terrible abuse. But look, I'm, a 50-year-old straight man who has had quite a few life experiences. I would be heartbroken if any woman ever thought that I was abusive or coercive to her. I also don't know the idea that someone can consent in the moment and years later say yes meant no.
Yes.
I just don't know what you do with that.
Right, and people regret doing it. So our memory, the way human memory works is, right, we remember things in a way that are favorable to us. Our memories trick us. This is why eyewitness testimony, when you're not in a sexual misconduct context, just, with police interviews, you can get 5 witnesses to the same incident, and they'll all say different things, even though they all watched it happen, because human memory is very fallible and very imperfect. And so we exaggerate things favorable to us in our mind and distort other things. Now, that is a far cry from saying, like, oh, everybody's just lying or something. And also, things can be very bad. It can be sleazy behavior. It can be, well, there's obviously power dynamics at play here. The kind of main woman in this story was, to some degree, financially related. She was going to be homeless. She was living with them and babysitting the kid. And so she, of course, could say, I don't want to get in this bath. That's a creepy thing to do. Right. But then maybe she would be out on the street, so she's going to get into the bath. But from his standpoint, it's, well, if you didn't want to do this, why did you get into the bathtub? Sure. It's not good. It's bad. Does that mean I can't, appreciate the Sandman anymore? He does, there's not going to be like, oh my God, he's not going to suddenly be broke on the street or something. He's a very wealthy man. Yeah. But it gets messy and dicey, and I think these are some of these difficulties were not well captured during the first Me Too wave discussions from 2017 to 2020. Now people seem more and even at the time there were I was friends with a lot of liberal due process minded writers and thinkers who would say, yes, this is serious, got to take it seriously, but particularly at the campus, and I did a lot of reporting on the Title IX sexual misconduct adjudication procedures that were just insane when you looked at them closely. People being accused of things years later, not being made aware of the evidence against them, not being entitled to have an attorney present for the proceedings, the presumption of guilt being that you are basically presumed guilty, because it wasn't a criminal setting, it was you're going to, as a consequence of this, get expelled. But although that can be financially ruinous thing to happen to you in an elite college that's as bad or worse than getting sent to prison for some short amount of time. So there was a lot of that I was concerned about the norms of due process falling by the wayside.
I know we have to wrap this, but I do, I don't think people should be presumed guilty. That's obviously unjust. I do think that for many years, decades beyond, there was a presumption that women complaining about sexual mistreatment had brought it on themselves.
There was a disrespect of them, yes.
Right.
They were laughed out of court. And that was horrible. And that was, when there was correcting of that started to be done from the 90s over, as you got more good, the kind of feminism that I am A-okay with, particularly in legal training and law training, to get this is what it is like when someone comes forward and makes an accusation of this kind of violent crime in a courtroom, how to treat them. So I'm certainly glad we have corrected for that, and I didn't come away from this story going, oh my God, what a pack of lies.
Right.
Defend Neil Gaiman. It is always, kind of the hypocrisy, right, of someone who presents themselves as this, progressive male feminist type person, and then look at their sordid past is another example of that. But
absolutely.
We will continue to discuss that. Coming up next, how much does it cost for a front row seat at inauguration on Monday? We're going to find out. Stay tuned.